There's a card from Nana on the counter. Let me go make your hot chocolate." The shadow thing floated along next to her, following her into the apartment as if attached. I sat down in a plastic chair, feeling jittery, while Patty made my cocoa. Most mornings were relaxing, sipping warm drinks on the balcony, but not today. The combination of the humid morning air and the weird vision made me feel claustrophobic. I couldn't believe I was seeing something else. Nothing strange had happened to me for more than 2 years. I thought it was over. I closed my eyes and laid my forehead on the table. Would it ever end? I sat up when Patty returned, setting my cocoa in front of me and sitting in the other plastic chair with her coffee. I sneaked another peek at the cloud when she wasn't looking. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked me. Time to act normal. I cleared my throat. "Yeah. So, there's a party next week for the end of the school year. I was wondering if I could maybe go with Jay, if it's okay." I thought of Scott and hoped she'd say yes. Patty sniffed and twitched her nose. "Will this person's parents be there?" she asked in a tight tone. Would they? I don't know. "Well, I'll need to talk to them first. If it's just a small get-together with parental supervision, then I'll consider it." Sheesh. Patty made it seem like I was prone to bad behavior or something. Me, the school's little Miss Goody-Goody. I didn't understand why she couldn't trust me. I must have been pouting, because she set the paper down and gave me a consoling pat on the arm. "You still want to get your license after school today, hun?" "Yes," I answered, because that was what normal 16-year-olds did, and I would feign normalcy if it killed me. "All right, and then dinner at La Tia's?" "Yes," I said, my mood lightening. Mexican food was our favorite. We went to the little rinky-dink restaurant for every birthday, and whenever Patty got an unexpected bonus, which wasn't very often. Newspapers and other agencies hired her sporadically, so her income had never been steady. We'd struggled during the years I attended private school, despite partial financial aid. I put my foot down after 8th grade, insisting on public school when I found a pile of late notices tucked between 2 cookbooks. "Sounds good to me. I'll pick you up after school. I hate to run, but I have to get some stuff done this morning, since we'll be busy girls this afternoon." She kissed my cheek with a loud smack. "You sure you're feeling okay?" "Yeah, I'm sure. Love you," I said. "Love you too." I watched her go inside with the cloud trailing close behind. Birds were chattering to one another in a nearby tree, and the air smelled like wet grass. I pushed my hearing out to the birds, testing my ability. I concentrated, sending it in an invisible pencil-thin line, then bubbling it around them. The birds sounded as if they were perched on my shoulder. The heightening of my sense of smell and taste had come together the night of the fire, leaving a deadly flavor in my mouth. It had been like being stuck in a small, closed, unvented room with a smoking barbecue grill. I had no way of knowing I could control it at first. I thought I was dying or going insane. Every year or so, the nightmare would return as a new sense blossomed. My head wanted to explode when my hearing enhanced. Hundreds of voices and sounds within a mile radius shouted like blaring televisions with no volume control. I couldn't hear my own cries. My enhanced vision, the 5th and final sense, welcomed me into my preteens. At least I could close my eyes with that one. Mastering each sense had taken major practice, not to mention causing migraines, vomiting, and nosebleeds. Being able to hear and see and smell everything within a 1-mile radius was major sensory overload, and unfortunately, perfect health did not make me immune to pain. I'd been to the doctor only for annual checkups. Other than the migraines, I never got sick. Cuts and scrapes and bruises healed in a matter of hours, sometimes less. It wasn't like on television, though, where a superhero's gash closed and mended itself in seconds before your very eyes. I could watch it happening over the course of a couple of hours, like a flower tilting and opening to the morning sun, but who had time for that? I missed a lot of school during those days. The only advantage of having no friends before 9th grade was having nobody to explain myself to. At least I had Patty. She fostered me as an infant, adopting me as soon as the states of California and Georgia would allow. I was old enough to call her Pat by that point. I couldn't hide the physical side effects of everything I went through, but Patty nurtured me through it all with no questions. She brushed my long hair with care when my sense of touch developed. It felt like each tangle would mangle my scalp forever. It hurt to move my arms because of the sensitive skin and muscle. When a plague of migraines came and I couldn't keep food down, Patty somehow got her hands on serious prescription-strength painkillers that would supposedly knock out a grown man and have him sleeping for hours. After the first one, I felt a blessed sense of drowsy relief for about 20 minutes. Then, the blistering pain broke through again. Patty was horrified when she found out I'd taken 6 in one afternoon. The label warning said to take no more than 2 per day. After she took them away, I searched the house with a blind obsession all week, but never found them. Each physical sense got easier to rein in as I gained focus. Eventually, I was able to use my normal sensory levels at all times, unless I chose to strengthen them, which might have been fun if there were someone to share it with. Only there wasn't. The hazy little clouds were everywhere, following people. Every person had one. I stared at them outright all day, which I'm sure made me seem even weirder than usual. I watched Jay's move around him as I switched books at my locker. "What's up, birthday girl?" he asked, glancing around himself. "Do I got a spitball on me or something?" "No, nothing. Sorry." I forced my eyes to his face. "I'm getting my license today." "Sweet. Good thing Patty's car is a stick shift. That means you can drive mine, too." "Good thing." I agreed. Jay's car was a clunker. It made Patty's old sedan look mint. I slammed my locker, and we let ourselves be herded by the crowd to our classes. When Jay wasn't looking, I discreetly reached out to touch the white cloud in front of me, and my hand went through it. I turned to Jay. "Want to go to that end-of-the-year party next Friday?" I asked him. He bumped knuckles with the president of the drama club going the opposite direction. A girl from the dance team swung her locker closed and gave Jay a flirty look as we passed. He stared over his shoulder at her before returning to our conversation. "The one at Jean's? You really want to?" "Yeah, I think so," I said, "if Patty will let me." We were at my class now. Jay hitched his thumbs under the straps of his backpack on his shoulders. "Listen." He hesitated. "Just watch out for Scott, okay?" "Huh?" "Wait a sec," I said. "How can you get all excited about someone like Kaiden Rowe, but warn me about someone like Scott McAllister?" Jay looked down and scuffed the floor with the toe of his tennis shoe, making it squeak. "You don't hear him in the PE locker room when it's just the guys." "Oh." I pondered this. Does he say things about me? "No, not you. You think I'd let him do that?" He pulled his eyes away from me. "Look, never mind. Just forget I said anything." I wondered whether Jay was jealous of Scott, not over me, but just in general. Scott was popular, but then again, so was Jay, in a different way. I'd never sensed jealousy from Jay about anything. His color now was only a mild grayish-brown of worry. "I'll be careful," I promised. "And you'll be there too, and I bet Kayla will go." All right, he said. "We'll go." He left me, running down the hall to his class before the tardy bell. His white cloud trailed close behind him. I slipped into my own class just in time, blinking at the room full of floating mists around my classmates. Those were going to take some getting used to. It was world history, and we were assigned group work. I had this class with Jean, so I decided to take advantage of the mild chaos of desks being moved and people shuffling places. "Hey, Jean," I whispered. He looked up and gave me a nod. He was short and muscular, like Scott, from wrestling, though Jean was in a lighter weight class. My mother, she kind of wants to talk to your mom about the party to make sure it's going to be supervised and all that. I tried not to cringe. His eyebrows went up for a second. Yeah, I hear you, girl. He tore off a corner of his paper. Have her call this number the day before the party. Just tell her that my ma works crazy hours, so that'll be the best day to reach her. Cool? I felt giddy as I thanked him, slipping the paper in my pocket and heading for my group. Chapter 4. Lake Party. The next Friday was our last day of school, and it was sticky, hot. Dusk brought little relief from the muggy heat. The air conditioner in Jay's car pushed out lukewarm air, even on its coldest setting. My feet were propped on his dusty dashboard on our way to Jean's lake house. I fanned us both with an old French fry box from the floor that still smelled like grease. I'd never been to a lake house, though I'd been to the lake plenty of times for church picnics or afternoons with Patty. I always enjoyed the serenity of the winding drive thick with trees. We turned down a bumpy gravel road and made our way toward the lights of other cars and a beautiful, massive log cabin. It was getting darker now as we parked and got out. Crickets, frogs, and cicadas serenaded us from all directions in the moist, warm air. The house was brightly lit, but our path was not, so I extended my sight to be sure I didn't trip on any rocks or fallen branches along the way. Along with being able to see far away, I could adjust my sensitivity to light. I like to think of it as night vision. The moon was a crescent sliver and wouldn't have been bright enough for normal eyes to see by, but it worked for me. Our feet crunched the gravel as we walked. Get a load of this place, Jay gawked. I know, it's huge. The house had 3 vast levels with wraparound porches and a vaulted roof. It looked like a lodge. I pulled my sight back in as we reached the porch rimmed with lights. Voices and laughter were mingling with loud hip-hop music inside. When Jean answered the door, the change in volume hit us hard. No way! Look who's here, y'all! What's up, Jay? They smacked hands in a clasp, and Jean looked at me. Anna Witt in the house. He leaned in and we hugged, giving me a strong whiff of alcohol on his breath. He must have been sneaking drinks while his parents weren't looking. We walked through, bumping shoulders with the steadily growing crowd. Jay was greeted by everyone he came across. Jean's family room had been turned into a darkened dance floor, stereo blaring. The dining room was full of kids standing and cheering, playing some kind of game. Jay and I stopped. Girls and guys stood across the table from one another, placing their plastic cups at the edge of the table and trying repeatedly to flip the cups over one-handed. It was a race. Kristen Miller's cup finally landed upside down, and she threw her arms up in victory. The girls jumped up and down screaming, while the boys moaned and shook their heads. That looks fun, I said to Jay as we watched from the doorway. It's a drinking game, he explained. Flip cup. You gotta drink whatever's in the cup before you can flip it. No fair being sober. Oh. We moved to the gigantic kitchen, where the soaring vaulted ceiling loomed high over stainless steel appliances and terracotta tiling. The entirety of the massive granite kitchen island was covered in bright-colored plastic cups, juices, sodas, beer cans, and bottles of alcohol. My stomach tightened. His parents were allowing blatant underage drinking? A group of people stood in front of a huge window overlooking the water. Jean turned from the group and came over. What you drinking? He hitched a thumb toward the island. Nothing for me, thanks, I said. I sensed Jay's hesitation. Be strong. You don't need it, I silently urged him. He made eye contact with me and sighed before answering. Nah, nothing right now, man. You sure? Jean eyeballed us in disbelief. My sister just turned 21, so we all put in money and told her to buy out the store and keep the change. Where are your parents? I asked, glancing around. Bahamas. Bahamas? I couldn't keep the shock from my voice. Yeah, that was my sister's cell your mom called. She can pull off the parental voice dead on. I can't believe y'all aren't drinking. Better get it before it runs out. The doorbell rang, and he darted away, sliding on socked feet into the hall now swarming with people. I was dumbfounded. Patty thinks his parents are here, I muttered. Jay scratched around the stubble of hair on his head. She does. Do you want to leave? Is that what you're saying? He asked with reluctance. I didn't answer him. I didn't want to leave, but at the same time, I felt guilty staying. Let's give it 1 hour, I compromised. Is that okay? Deal. 1 hour. Jay was still running his hands over his head. Then he rubbed his hands together, a nervous gray streak cutting into his yellow aura. I could have just 1 drink, he said, sounding hopeful. You can drive us home now. You, I said, poking a playful finger to his chest, are the life of the party. Other people have to drink to be how you are when you're completely sober. He pinched his chin hair, thinking, I don't know what it is about you, Whit, but I can't seem to deny you anything, no matter how bad I want it. It's really annoying. I smiled, because I could see he was feeling a pale yellow contentment without a trace of annoyance. Behind Jay, Kayla's bone-straight blonde hair and chic wide-rimmed glasses came into sight. She was on the dance team and had an hourglass figure. I spy your crush, I whispered. Sweet, he whispered back. Go ahead and talk to her. I'm going out to see the view. I gave his big old bicep a squeeze and made my way to the back door. I knew the moment Jay caught up to Kayla because her whole gaggle of girlfriends broke out into squeals at his loud greeting. Nobody else was out on the deck. I walked to the edge and put my hands on the wooden rail. It was dark now. Crickets and frogs seemed to be competing for who could be noisiest. Lightning bugs flashed from every direction. There was a dimly lit walkway of stones that led down to a dock and boathouse. Distant voices and moving shadows told me there were partiers down there as well. The water glistened in the moonlight. Warm air sat heavily on my skin, but I was comfortable. The door opened behind me, and a muddle of music and voices spilled out before it closed again. There you are. I turned to the voice. Hey, Scott, I said. And hello, butterflies. Ever since he'd invited me to the party, he'd been on my mind. He came up and stood next to me with a red cup. It smelled doughy and sour. Beer, he said. Want a sip? No, thanks. I felt shy. He tipped his head back and drained it in several gulps, then turned to the side and burped. Nice. Excuse me, he said, setting down his cup on the ledge. So, what are you doing out here by yourself? Just taking it all in. It's beautiful. Yep, he said. Your hair looks pretty. Thank you. I had a strip on top pulled back with bobby pins, and the rest hung down my back. Remember Mr. Bunker's astronomy lessons last year in earth science? I asked, looking up at the sparkling sky, fascinated by the magnitude of creation. No. Scott guffawed. Okay, look right there. I pointed. It's the Big Dipper. That square box part right there is the ladle, and then those stars are the handle. See it? Scott sidled closer, and I traced the shape with an outstretched finger. Where? Oh, hey, I see it. Cool. We got quiet, and I realized this was a very romantic setting, if only I weren't so fidgety and unable to look in his direction. We should go inside, he said. Have you been in the basement? I shook my head. It's awesome. I'll get you a drink, and then we can check it out. Scott, I didn't want to have to say it again. It would almost be easier to just have a drink so people would leave me alone about it. How about something non-alcoholic? He offered. Soda? Juice? I was getting thirsty. Sure, thanks. Anything is fine." He took me by the hand as he led me inside. It felt strange, but nice. There were even more people now, and many of their colors were faded or gone from alcohol consumption. The clouds were still there with each person, not affected as the ours were. Even though the white shadowy things were see-through, it was still a lot to take in with so many people crammed together. The air was heavy and hot despite the high ceilings. As we made our way through, still holding hands, I recognized athletes from school as they called out, "What up, Scott?" and "Scotty!" They did knuckle bumps in passing, eyed me, then nodded knowingly to Scott, giving him a thumbs up or a high five. I pretended not to notice. I was caught between feeling embarrassed, nervous, and, God forbid, excited as we came to the stairway for the basement. I wondered if this party was a date for us. Maybe I would get my first kiss. My legs trembled, and I clasped his hand tighter. 1 hour. I would give this party 1 hour, then I'd have to honor Patty. Okay, maybe 15 minutes had passed since I made that deal, but I wouldn't count those. 60 minutes, starting now. "Go ahead on down," Scott shouted close to my ear. "You can find us a seat, and I'll be right down with our drinks." My knees wobbled the whole way down the stairs. I stopped at the bottom in the entryway. The huge open-spaced recreation room was a guy's dream. A giant flat-screen television was mounted on the wall, surrounded by a plush, oversized L-shaped couch. There was a pool table, a foosball table, standing arcade games, and a side area with a huge card table and bar. The walls were covered in college sports memorabilia. As I surveyed the people in the room, 2 things were quickly apparent. First, the half of the room with couches was currently being used as make-out central, and second, the other half of the room was filled with older boys who I didn't recognize, smoking what I instinctively knew to be marijuana, though it was my first time ever smelling the tangy sweet smoke. The scent gripped me with a longing that nearly brought me to my knees. Panicked, I took the stairs back up, 2 steps at a time. At the top, I concentrated on calming my breathing as I made my way through the crowd toward the kitchen. Scott stood at the island talking to one of his friends, Kristen Miller. Something about their whispered conversation made me stop and stretch out my hearing toward them. "She doesn't know?" Kristen asked. "Not yet, so just keep your mouth shut," Scott said. Kristen laughed. She was a notorious gossip. "She is gonna be so mad at you?" "Nah," he said. "She'll probably thank me for it." I stood where I was, pulling my hearing back in and wondering what they were talking about. Maybe his ex-girlfriend was here and she'd be mad to know he was talking to me? But why would he say she would thank him for it? I caught a glimpse of Jay's fuzzy head as he bounded toward me. I was glad to see him. He gave me a bear hug, lifting me off my feet a second before setting me back down. "You'll never believe this." He was nearly out of breath. "I just talked to this guy who was at the Lascivious show tonight, and he said the band is coming." Say what? My heart gave a great bang in my chest. I'd almost forgotten about the drummer with the strange starburst. Or it could be that I'd blocked the encounter from my memory. "Coming here?" I asked. "Tonight? Why?" "Because this is the best party ever. There are people here from, everywhere. Everybody knows about it." "Still, I wouldn't get your hopes up too high." I wondered if I was saying it more for his benefit or my own. Scott was making his way toward the basement with our 2 drinks held high in the air. I called out to him, jumping up and waving my arms until he noticed. His forehead creased as he glanced from me to Jay. He made his way over and handed me a cup. "Thanks," I said. Jay and Scott nodded at each other. "What's up, man?" Jay asked rather coolly. "Not a whole lot. How about you?" Chillin'. A heavy silence followed. I'd never noticed the feelings between Jay and Scott were about as warm and fuzzy as a bald cat. But then again, I'd never been around them both like this. Their auras brimmed with jagged gray irritation. Scott took a big drink, and I looked down at my reddish-orange juice.
"So what are you kids drinking?"
Jay asked, eyeballing my cup.
"Beer for me. I just threw together some different juices for Anna. No alcohol."
Scott turned to me.
"You ready to go downstairs?"
My heart sank. "Oh," I said. Actually, I came back up here because most of the seats are taken, and there were some shady guys smoking up." His face fell. "Jay!" We all turned toward the trilling voice of Kayla, who was rushing at us and jumping into Jay's arms.
"Whoa, hey,"
he laughed. "I think the band you were talking about just pulled up," she told him.
"Ha!"
Jay let go of Kayla and turned to me, doing a funny little in-your-face dance with his tongue out.
"What's up now, hater?"
My heart raced and somersaulted as the two of them grabbed hands and left us. I did not want to see Cotton Row again. Did I? No. And besides, for the first time, a boy was showing interest in me, and I was interested too. I didn't want to worry about some disrespectful guy messing things up. I was suddenly parched, so I took a huge gulp of my juice. Yum. Tart, but sweet. And something else. I took another drink. What was that? I sniffed the liquid. There was no burning smell of alcohol. I took another long gulp. Then I chugged, knowing even as I did it, there was something in that drink. But I wouldn't stop myself. I waited for the panic to rise, but instead, I felt myself relaxing. This party wasn't half bad after all, even if the most passive-aggressive, rudest, sexiest guy in Georgia had just shown up. I didn't have to talk to him.
"What band was he talking about?"
asked Scott. "Lascivious. They're Jay's favorite."
Never heard of them.
Krista Miller and Veronica from Spanish class made their way to us, whispering and giggling, their cheeks flushed from drinking. They had similar haircuts, brown bobs that went up their necks and slanted downward in front to their chins. Veronica's hair was darker, though, almost black, and she had new chunky red highlights. Veronica was the drunkest, her colors blurry. She slung her arms around my neck and let out a silly, happy squeal, slurring her words. "Girl, can I just say, you are the coolest little thing ever? I'm so glad you're here." Normally, I would wonder whether she was making fun of me, but I was feeling very light and buoyant at the moment, so I found myself going along with it, even enjoying it. "Thank you," I shouted. "And I love your highlights, by the way." Her eyes lit up. "Oh my God, you're so gonna be my BFF tonight. Come on, let's go dance." Kristen rolled her eyes at us.
"Wait,"
said Scott.
"Finish your drink so it doesn't spill on the dance floor."
Excellent idea. I finished every drop of the delicious juice and handed the empty cup to Scott. "Come on, I love this song." Veronica pulled my hand, and I let her lead me. "Come with," I called to Scott over my shoulder. He and Kristen followed. The four of us weaved through the people to the dance floor, where the music boomed, rattling windows with the bass. My inhibitions dropped like bricks off of me. When Veronica hollered, "Woo!" I threw my arms up and did the same. My head was so fuzzy inside. I'd lost my ability to sense other people's colors, and it was freeing. The clouds were still there, but they'd become like extensions of the people in my mind. Nothing could bother me at the moment. I didn't care whether I saw Cotton Row right then. Even he couldn't bring me down. Veronica and I danced. It was complete and utter bliss. Everyone was being so nice, not minding when I bumped into them. The warmth of close-huddled bodies was wonderful. I could feel each brush of my own limbs against others as I let my hips move and my eyes close. I faintly heard Kristen talking beside me. "She can't be feeling it already."
"Shut the hell up,"
Scott's voice hissed. Veronica lifted her cup to her mouth, but someone fell into her, knocking the cup to the ground. "Aw, crap," she said, and we both laughed, falling all over each other. My laughter was not right. It was smoother and lower than usual, and I was suddenly much too calm to work up a good belly laugh. I noticed how soft Veronica's shirt was. I rubbed it between my fingers. "You're feeling it now, girl," she said. "What was in my drink?" I asked, curious. "Some crushed-up ex. Don't be too mad at him. You're so lucky. I would have done it tonight, too, but my dad won't give me any money." I wasn't mad, just the opposite. Scott had been right. I wanted to thank him. I threw my head back, submerged in the sensation. The fact that I was high was what mattered. It was like a long-lost friend had found me and wrapped me in a cozy blanket. I wanted it to last forever. There was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind, but I ignored it. Soon, I couldn't focus on anything except the fact that my mouth felt like it had been stuffed with a sock. "My mouth is so dry," I yelled, "and my teeth are chattering. Come on, let's get you some water and gum. That'll help, and I need another frickin' drink, too." Once again, Veronica pulled me through the crowd by the hand. I felt as if I were walking on a squishy cloud, and everything were in slow motion. We pushed our way to the kitchen, where she spun to me and shouted, "Holy hot guy! Who the heck was that? Did you see him?" "Who?" I looked around. "Back in the hall. Hello! When we passed him, he was staring right at you." I looked in the general direction of the hall, but there were too many people. "I don't know. I didn't see him." I shrugged. "I'm happy we're friends." "Aw, you are so sweet. I can't believe we've never hung out before." Veronica slid a piece of gum in my mouth. I chewed like crazy, my jaw racing with a mind of its own, while she made herself a drink, splashing stuff all over the counter. Someone tapped my shoulder. My movements were sluggish as I turned, and it took a few seconds to process his face. "Jay!" I brought my arms up to his shoulders, gazing at him and letting my head flop back. "You okay?" he asked. "I am so good." I tried to talk normally, but the breathy voice that came out was totally unfamiliar. I rubbed little circles on his shoulders with my palms. "You are the bestest friend, Jay. I love you." "Are you drunk?" Uh-oh. He was upset. No. Everything was so nice, so perfect. I needed Jay to be happy, too. "She's rolling," Veronica said, popping some peanuts in her mouth with manicured fingers. He looked at me with huge eyes, and then moved my arms down and took a step away from me. "What the hell, Anna?" "Jay, please. Please don't be mad at me." I reached up to him, but he deflected my arms. "That's a little hypocritical, don't you think?" he asked, his face tight. All I could do was stare like a fawn in a spotlight. Jay had never, ever yelled at me. "Whatever, man. Forget this." He reached between Veronica and me, grabbing a half-full bottle of clear liquor before disappearing into the movement and noise around us. I was thankful when Scott walked up and filled in the empty gap Jay left behind. I didn't want any gaps tonight. "You just missed Jay being a total buzzkill," Veronica said to him. "And did you know that me and Anna are totally best friends now?" Scott looked at me hesitantly, but when I smiled, he slid an arm around my waist and pulled me to him. Jay's words had already filtered through me and were gone. There was no room in paradise for anything as ugly as anger. "Hey, you." Scott's voice was all melty and buttery in my ear. "Sorry, Veronica, but I'm going to have to steal your new best friend." "Y'all behave yourselves now." She winked. I turned to her, and we hugged like we'd never see each other again, and then Scott was weaving the two of us through the partygoers, up a curved wooden staircase, down the hall, and into a room. The sudden quiet was a shock to my ears when he shut the door behind us. Scott led us to what looked like a guest bed. He sat, so I sat. He lay back on his elbows, so I did too. When he turned his body to lean over me, I dropped my elbows and lay back, completely still.
"Are you mad at me?"
he asked. I shook my head. "Everything feels so soft." My fingers caressed the sides of my jeans. Even the normally rough feel of denim was like silk under my fingers.
"When I'm on E," he said, "I always think everyone should be naked, just like Adam and Eve."
That made perfect sense to me at the moment, and it seemed funny. "Just completely natural and happy," I said, and we smiled at each other.
"Do you know when I first started to like you?"
he asked.
"Remember last year after state match when I got the, cauliflower ear?"
I'd forgotten about that. He'd been so embarrassed about the grossly swollen ear that he'd gotten from the wrestling mats at the state competition. His girlfriend had even been disgusted enough to dump him.
"You were always sweet," he said. "You didn't stare at it like everyone else."
He laid his arm across my belly and caressed my waist.
"You know, Anna, it wouldn't take much for you to be more, I don't know, popular or whatever. I've seen you play volleyball and softball in gym. You're good. You could go out for sports and maybe wear some different clothes or something. I mean, you're pretty, but you could be like hot, you know?"
I was quiet for a second. Part of my brain contemplated being offended, but it was overruled by a heavy blanket of peacefulness in my bloodstream. "I'm sorry, Scott, but even if I had the money, I just don't care about those things. I want people to like me for who I am. Isn't that what you want too?" I reached up to touch his face, but he grabbed my hand and held it.
"Have you kissed many guys?"
"I've never kissed anyone," I admitted.
"Not even Jay?"
"No way. He's like my brother." I tried to think of Jay now. What had been wrong with him earlier? It made me feel sad, but I couldn't recall why. "How long will this last?" I asked. "This feeling?"
"About 4 hours. Then it takes a couple hours to come down."
Come down? That sounded awful. I wondered if I could talk Scott into giving me more.
"Anna."
"Huh?" I tried to focus on him.
"I want to be your first kiss."
"Okay," I whispered. Before he even had a chance to lean down, the door banged open, letting in the party's ear-splitting volume. We both sat up on the bed, and I found myself staring into the deep blue eyes of Kaiden Rowe.
"What the—"
Scott started.
"Ah, there you are, love. Let's go then."
Kaiden was looking at me and waving me toward him. I sat there, weighed down with shock.
"Can you walk, or will I have to carry you?"
Kaiden asked. Scott raised his voice.
"What are you doing, man?"
"I need to chat with Anna." But Kaiden didn't look at Scott when he said it. His eyes stayed on me. He remembered my name, and it sounded so lovely when he said it. Scott and I turned to each other. It never crossed my mind not to go with Kaiden. He was the most amazing part of my whole wakeful dream. "I'll be back," I said, standing.
"I wouldn't count on it, actually,"
said Kaiden, coming forward to take my hand and pull me from the room. I was pondering how many people had tugged me by the arm tonight, just as Scott yelled, "Dude!" and Kaiden slammed the door shut behind us. Chapter 5. Likewise. Kaiden kept a firm grip on my hand. I concentrated on where our bodies connected, marveling at my hand inside of his. I didn't recall leaving the house or walking down the dock, but when we stopped, I processed the fact that we were outside the boathouse. Kaiden banged the doorway with the side of his fist. "Everyone out," he told them with authority. "We were here first," one of the boys inside said. "Sod off." Kaiden's tone was scary calm. The 6 figures brushed past us with weak protests and headed back to the party. When they were gone, I expected Kaiden to go into the boathouse, but instead, he walked out to the end of the dock and sat. I followed, sitting on the edge with my feet hanging over, not quite reaching the water. I took in his brown t-shirt with a golden dragon stenciled down one shoulder and across the chest. It was just snug enough to accentuate his toned body underneath. When I looked at his face, I was shaken to see how intensely he was looking back at me. A breeze brushed my skin like a feather. My teeth chattered, but I didn't know if it was from the X or the cool air. "Who are you?" he asked me yet again. "I don't know how you want me to answer that." A sudden flash throughout my body cracked my fuzzy dream state. I gasped. "What is it?" he asked. There it was again, but longer this time. Reality was seeping back in. I was beginning to feel insecure and anxious. "I think it feels like it's starting to wear off, but he said 4 hours. I couldn't sit there. I stood up, feeling panicked. I was shaking inside. Kaiden stood too, pulling my chin up to make me look at him. "Have you ever been sick?" he asked, holding my eyes with his. "Sick?" I couldn't think. "The flu, tonsillitis, anything." Now he had my attention. Another spasm pushed me further out of my dream state as I bent over with my hands on my knees. "Maybe this little sweet will help you." He held the small white pill. Yes! I grabbed for it, but he was faster. "Answer all of my questions first. Any illnesses in your lifetime?" "No." "How far back can you remember?" This question stilled my trembling. We stared hard at each other. He couldn't possibly know about that. It was my ultimate secret. He moved closer, just as he had the night we met, and lowered his voice. "Answer the question." I stared up at his mouth, his handsome lips, and for a second, I forgot about the pill. I cleared my throat. "Fine," I whispered. "All the way back, my birth, and even before that. Happy?" He nodded, straight-faced. I couldn't believe I'd just admitted that out loud to him, and he hadn't reacted as if it were the slightest bit strange. I looked down at his hand by his side in a tight fist, my escape from reality held within it. "Now for the important part," he said. "Who is your father?" I don't know. I was adopted." "Bollocks. You must have some idea." He raised his arm, and his hand hovered over the water. "There was this one man. I remember him from the day I was born. Jonathan LeGray. I've always assumed he was my father, but I never even talked to him. Please, I don't know anything about him. He's in prison." I stared at his hand as he lowered it to the safety of his side. "Yes, of course," said Kaiden, eyeing me differently now. "I should have guessed from your behavior tonight." My thoughts weren't coherent enough to care what he meant. I was shaking all over now, frantic with longing. I had to stay in my escape world. I couldn't go back. "My pill," I pleaded. "You mean this one?" He held it up, and my eyes widened. "Sorry, love. Just an aspirin." And to my horror, he nonchalantly tossed it into the lake, and with a light plunk, it sank. "No!" I screamed. He stilled me by grasping my upper arms in his strong hands. "How long ago did he give you the drug?" "What? I don't know. Maybe 40 minutes?
"It should be completely out of your system very soon. You'll be fine. Just sit here and try to calm yourself."
He released my arms and I sat down, resting my forehead on my knees and rocking back and forth, battling minor tremors. He was cruel for tricking me with that pill. I hadn't wanted something that badly since those pain pills years ago. The wind blew against my skin again, and I heard tiny waves splash the rocky shore. After 2 minutes, the thick fog in my head started to lift, and I was racked with the ugliness of clarity. I should not have come to this stupid party. I should have left the second I found out Jean's parents weren't here. I couldn't believe Scott thought it was okay to give me ecstasy. Why had I loved it and craved more like some kind of fiend? Oh, I almost got my first kiss while I was high. I looked up now and saw Kaiden sitting on the edge of the dock again, looking out at the water, and realized what his questions meant. He knew something about me. I approached him, afraid he would bolt if I pressed too hard for information. "Why did it come and go so fast?" I asked.
"Our bodies fight anything foreign."
Our bodies?
Germs, cancer, disease, the whole lot. Drugs and alcohol burn through quickly. Hardly worth the effort. I tried smoking. Spent days coughing up black tar.
"That's attractive," I said.
"Precisely. Can't afford to be unattractive."
He laughed without any amusement. "So," I was desperate not to scare him off, "are you like me?"
"Yes and no, it seems."
I noticed something then. I would have seen it sooner if I hadn't been out of my mind on X. "Why don't you have one of those cloud thingies around you?" I asked him. He turned and looked at me in disbelief.
"Cloud thingies? You can't be serious."
"Do you know what I'm talking about?" "You do, don't you?" He began to stand, and I jumped to my feet as well. He looked up at the house, furrowing his brow.
"Are your senses back now?"
he asked. I knew he meant my special senses, and I marveled at how normal he made it sound. "I think so," I said.
"There's a fight in the house. I think you'd better listen."
I stood up and stretched out my hearing. It was slower than normal and took more effort, but it finally broke through to the inside of the house. Yelling, chaos, punching and scuffling, glass breaking, girls screaming, people shouting their names to try to break it up. "Oh my gosh, Scott and Jay!" I took off as fast as my legs would go down the swaying dock. I couldn't even concentrate enough to turn on my night vision, but I somehow didn't trip or fall. I threw open the back door and roughly elbowed my way through. 3 huge football players were dragging Jay out onto the front porch. He was flailing and yelling obscenities I'd never heard from him. I stopped in the doorway and looked around. The window in the front room was shattered. Girls were crying. Scott stood there in the front room where the music and dancing had stopped, and everyone was now watching. He held his nose, which was bleeding, as was his arm. His shirt was torn from the collar to the waist and was splattered with blood. He must have sobered up some, because I saw with my sixth sense how he felt now. Brittle, dark fear. Jean stumbled his way into the open space. His shirt was off, and by the looks of his girlfriend's tangled hair, they'd been occupied in Makeout Central.
"Oh man, my parents are gonna kill me."
"Party foul," someone whispered in the crowd.
"Jean," said Scott, sounding whiny and nasal, "Jay went crazy. He came out of nowhere and sucker punched me. He threw me into the window. I think he broke my nose." "Damn."
Jean rested his hands on top of his head and shook it back and forth. Jay began a fresh round of thrashing outside, kicking and screaming. The 3 big guys tightened their grips and hollered for him to calm down and stay still. I ran through the door and down the porch steps to him. "Jay?" He looked up at me with the eyes of a wild man I didn't know. His cheeks were flaming red. He bared his teeth and panted through them. 2 guys held his arms, and 1 guy stood behind him, grasping him around the chest. Jay stared at me until his breathing calmed and his fierce look softened into a pitiful sob.
"He drugged you, Anna. Drugged you."
I knew what he meant. I nodded to the football players. "It's okay, guys. Thank you. I'm gonna take him home now." When they let go of him, he stumbled 3 steps backward and fell into a bush. That was going to hurt in the morning. I rushed to him.
"Here, I'll help you to the car,"
said the biggest guy. I think his name was Frederick, a new graduate. The other 2 walked back into the house. Frederick got under one of Jay's arms and lifted him, while I got under his other arm. Frederick had been a big defensive linebacker, so I didn't feel any of Jay's weight. We made our way into the darkness as music resumed inside the party. I glanced back at the house and turned on my extra sight, looking for any sign of Kaiden Rowe. Nothing. There was so much more I wanted to ask him. Most important, why were we like this? What were we? We. Oh my gosh. Just the thought of someone else being like me sent a crazed bolt of energy through my body. I had to see him again, as soon as possible. When we got to the car, I fished Jay's keys and cell phone from his pocket, leaned the passenger seat all the way back, and stepped aside while Frederick put him in. I thanked Frederick, and he went back to the party. Jay was completely passed out. It crossed my mind that I could go back in and find Kaiden again, but what if Jay woke up? Plus, I didn't want to deal with all the drama flying around. Instead, I pushed my hearing out to the dock and listened. It was silent. I focused my hearing around the house, scrunching up my face with the loud onslaught, and I said into the air, "I'm not finished with you, Kaiden Rowe." From somewhere in the kitchen, a solitary accented voice replied, "Likewise." Despite the night's warmth, I got a chill. After climbing in the car and adjusting the driver's seat, I called Jana from Jay's phone. She answered from a party of her own. She'd graduated the year before, but still lived with her family, commuting to college. When she learned of her little brother's current inability to walk himself into their home, she cursed and said she would meet us there. Maybe we could get him in without waking their parents. What a mess. I was nervous driving on the winding road through the pitch-dark woods, even with my night vision. I kept seeing the eyes of little animals reflected in the headlights, sometimes darting across the road and making me slam on the brakes. It wasn't until we were out of the forest and on a main road that I finally allowed myself to think about all that happened tonight. The more I thought about what Scott had done, the more upset I got. And I was disgusted at myself for enjoying it. I would have to deal with Scott eventually. I hated confrontation, but he couldn't be allowed to get away with it. At least the school year was over, and I wouldn't have to face any of those people for a couple of months. But all of my anger towards Scott and embarrassment at my own behavior were overshadowed by the conversation with Kaiden. Just thinking about it made my heart race all over again. I couldn't believe it. He was really like me. Which was what, exactly? He knew, of course. I wished I could have talked with him longer. I wondered how I could get hold of him. I supposed I could attach my phone number to a pair of my undies and throw them on stage at his next show. The thought actually made me laugh out loud. He'd probably take one look at the white cotton panties and chuck them in the trash. Jay stirred. He tried to say something, but it came out in one big slur. "What, Jay?" I used my soothing voice. "Gonna be sick." Oh, I pulled the car over and leaned over Jay to fling open his door, which stuck, as always. I got it open just in time. We had to stop once more after that. Poor Jay. I rubbed his back as he closed the door and leaned against it. There wasn't much else I could do. He began whimpering as we pulled into his neighborhood. "It's okay," I said. "No, it's not. I don't want to be like Grandpa Len." His whimper turned into a pained moan. "Who? What do you mean?" He didn't say anything else coherent after that. Jana stood by the curb with her arms crossed, ticked. I'd hate to be Jay tomorrow, for more reasons than one. Jana was hardcore goth and didn't take any crap. She and I got him flopped onto his bed without waking his parents, and then Jana drove me home.
"What in the world possessed him to get so hammered?"
she asked me. "The party was a little overwhelming."
"Wait, was this the one out at the lake? Even I heard about that party tonight. Must have been insane."
"It was crazy." We were quiet for a few minutes. "Who's Grandpa Lynn?" I asked.
"Huh?"
"Oh, he mentioned him?"
"Yeah, that's our mom's dad. He was this raging alcoholic. To hear Mom tell it, though, he was the nicest guy sober. She was crazy about him. Everyone was. Then he would drink, and it was like he had this evil twin. He hurt a lot of people. He battled his share of demons and eventually lost."
Chapter 6. Out of the Dark Days. It was already muggy and hot on our balcony at 9 the next morning as I took a sip of my cocoa. There was no breeze, and the smell of cow manure wafted from a nearby pasture. Patty came out with her coffee and sniffed, crinkling her nose. She opened her paper, and I opened my book. I couldn't concentrate. Too much had happened at the party last night. I didn't like thinking about the day of my birth, partly because it was unnatural to be able to remember that far back, and partly because I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't know how it should make me feel, and I didn't want to feel the wrong thing, if that were even possible. But now that Cotton had picked that scab, it was bleeding and needed tending. I called the time before my birth the dark days, not because they were bad, but because being in utero was dark. It was like being cradled in a warm hammock at night. What I remembered most was the sound of my mother's voice. She was singing the first time I was able to hear the warbled sounds. When I thought to try out my limbs, pushing out to meet the firm, smooth resistance surrounding me, she'd push back and laugh, which bounced me. Jonathan LeGray's voice had been there during my dark days too, booming, gravelly, and gruff. Being born was disorienting, too bright and too cold, but worst of all had been the feeling of having lost some sort of knowledge that had been commonplace during my dark days. I couldn't see well with my filmy infant vision, but I remember the impact of the man's eyes as they bore down on me that day. They were filled with some of the knowledge that I now lacked.
"Just say no to drugs, will you, kid?"
I never knew whether the gruff man's message to me had been serious or sarcastic. I'd never seen him again. I could still recall the nun, a wrinkled old woman who emitted a pure lavender peace, and Patty standing over me with her hair falling around her face the day she came to get me. She nearly exploded with love when they placed me in her outstretched hands, as if I were a fragile gift. That was the only part of the memory I understood and could therefore cherish freely, the moment I met Patty. I watched her now as she turned the page of the newspaper and hummed to herself. A train passed by on the hill through a scattering of pine trees. "I met someone who's like me," I said. The train blew its whistle. The newspaper slipped from Patty's hands and fell to the floor in a crinkly swoosh. I was taken aback by the black storm cloud of emotion that billowed around her. "Patty?" I whispered.
"Who was it?"
The panic in her voice frightened me. She gripped the edge of the plastic table as if to steady herself. I don't really know him," I stammered, "but I talked to him last night a little."
"Stay away from him."
She pointed at me for emphasis and stared with giant eyes. The phone rang inside the apartment as we watched each other. It rang again.
"Get the phone," she said. "I need to think."
I jumped up and ran in, answering on the third ring. "Hello?"
"Hey,"
said a weak and scratchy voice. "Jay, you sound terrible." I sat down at the kitchen table and glanced out at Patty. She was sitting with her eyes closed, still holding the table's edge, her posture rigid.
I feel terrible, he said. How much do you hate me?
Don't be crazy, Jay. I was just worried about you. Are you sick?
I feel like I got hit by a Mack truck. I don't remember everything, but what I do remember makes me feel like a jackass.
We were lucky Jana helped.